All right, welcome back. Well, yes, indeed, we're going to be focusing on circumstances surrounding, well, they're all linked actually. So we're going to look at the economy, we'll look at the impact of certain policies and how they are affecting where we are or what's playing themselves out today. So we've got Roman Osehale, who is a business survey analyst this morning. Good morning. Thank you for coming on today. Well, clearly, a lot of those surveys and figures that we've seen, either from the MBS, the World Poverty Clock, several data, they all they're warnings of sorts to us all in terms of what we need to do, where we are at the moment, perhaps to guide government policies. But you have equally delved into some of these items in terms of understanding the challenges and then perhaps propose solutions. So from your perspective, what are the highlights of what you've seen?
Thank you for having me, first of all. We all know that it's a very challenging time for our economy and also the social aspect in Nigeria. And we know that the pandemic also dealt a serious and huge blow on the social economic balance of the country. But there is something that we all need to see, and which is very worrisome, and that is the present situation of things economically. And I want to state this categorically, that we're not going to be looking at either any of the administration, but it's like a historical thing that has been happening, and then we can all reach our conclusions. Now, if they'll put up the slides so that we can start. If you look at, they have the slides? Slide 1. From the year, sorry, slide 2. From the year 2000, when the world started ringing the bell on climate change, and they said, you know, we're going to be tilting away from fossil fuel and going into renewable energy. Most of the economies of the world had started repositioning themselves to be able to face the challenges that are to come. But I think in our own case, we sat down, we were so comfortable because at some point oil was still selling at a very good price, we were still churning out large quantities. And the whole scenario now took us like on a surprise. Now, what is worrisome to me, if you look at the graph, Nigeria's total export to the United States in 2019 was 2.82 billion, with mineral, fuel, oil, and distillation products accounted for 2.73 billion. That is 96.8%. Now, if you look at the graph from 1995, you find out that between 2006 and 2012 or 13, we still had it very good. But our exports to these countries have continued to dwindle. And as they dwindled over time, it started, affecting our revenue. And as revenue is affected, we all know the implication of that. Now, what I did here was to look at some of our biggest trading partners and look at what constitutes our exports to those countries and what are the future implications. So if we're looking at a product that the West is phasing out and it still constitutes over 90% of our export, then we have a huge problem and also a huge challenge ahead of us.
Well, that's interesting. But if you don't mind me just punctuating you a little bit.
Yeah.
I know that, some of these slides, just as you have said, talk to some of our biggest, trade partners, US, UK, and a number of countries in Europe. But, since you want to take a closer look across the Nigeria historically, across different kinds of administrations, question that comes to my mind is, it's one thing to have policies. It's another thing altogether for that policy to be run by people who understand the need the need for succession of each of those policies. So, because you know very well that we have had a good number of national development plans over the years, from as far back as, independence and all of that. So if that is the challenge that we have on our hands, and we are still contending with this now, what it tells me is that it's not a problem of policy, it's the problem of implementation. So how do we ensure that whatever analysis we have come up with now and the conclusions that we draw are really going to go beyond television?
Okay, very good question. So, you see, it's not only a Nigerian problem. As we go on, we will see it's an African problem. Africa has never sat down to do value added. Africa has always been like a mineral resource economy. I want to ask you, just look back. Is there any product you mine or you grow in Africa that you add value to from beginning to the end, that you create a value chain? None. From cocoa that comes back as chocolate, from gold that comes back as wristwatches, your chains, your bangles and stuff, from diamonds that comes back as jewelries. There is none. So it's not just it's majorly a policy issue, but you see, I think it's more of a foresight, right? And as we go on, we will see the impact of what the Industrial Revolution did and how the Industrial Revolution actually buried Africa. You know, people talk about, the fourth Industrial Revolution is coming. It's been a hype, right? But is Nigeria or Africa ready for it? And I feel from research, right, that the fourth Industrial Revolution is coming to bury us. That's the truth. But you will see as we go ahead. Now, let's go to slide 2. I just want to establish the basis first, right? Okay. Let's go to slide 3, sorry, please. European Union. You see that in 2019, 25.7 billion mineral fuel, oil, distillation products accounted for 24.52 billion. That is 95.4%. This is the same Europe that is saying by 2035, we don't want fossil fuel cars on the road anymore, right? That is in 14 years' time. Now, the US, the president brought out a policy that by 2030, they want to cut down on carbon emission by 52% by 2030. So all those things, those figures, policymakers are supposed to have sat down, right from the late 90s to early 2000s and say, look, this is what is coming. How do we start to reposition the economy? How do we start to generate revenue from other sources so that we are not caught unawares? Next slide, please. You see the United Kingdom, 1.16 billion export. Mineral fuel, oil, and distillation products accounted for 1.14 billion, 98.3. Next slide, please. Germany, 1.16 billion. Mineral fuel, oil, and distillation products, 879.49 million, 75.8. Next slide, please. France. France is 99.4%. Next slide. China, 1.67 billion. Mineral fuel accounted for 1.54 billion. That is 92.2%. Next slide, please. Canada, 99.6. This is the same product that the world is facing out. So why and where did we go wrong? That is what we're going to find out today. Next slide, please. India, 8.26 billion. Mineral fuel, oil, and distillation products accounted for 8.16 billion. That's 98.8%. Now, when you look at the imports from this country, right, it's the reverse. Now, as I said earlier, it's not just a Nigerian problem, it's also an African problem. They take all this, our produce, right? They go add value to it and then bring it back. So most of what we import from these countries are finished products, right? Now, next slide, please. Brazil, 87.1%. Now, Go to the next slide. Good. Now, this will be our topic of discussion. Now, you see, total export of Singapore in 2019 was 645 billion. Sub-Saharan Africa, 428.2 billion. Sub-Saharan Africa is made up of 46 countries. About 23 million square kilometers. 1.1 billion people. But total export was just 428.2 billion. Why? We'll find out. Now, Singapore, on the other hand, Singapore is not as big as Lekki Peninsula. Do you know that? Singapore is 728.3 square kilometers. 5.7 million people. But look at the productivity per capita. We are not being productive. And it is affecting us economically.
In what way, pardon me, in what way would you say the pattern of government has affected the productivity of Singapore as opposed to sub-Saharan Africa?
Good. See, there are 4 things that propel industrialization. There are 4 critical factors to industrialization. 1, you have innovation. 2, you have government policies. 3, you have availability of resource demand. 4, you have industrial infrastructures. Now, if you look at those 4 things, Africa really, apart from the availability of resource demand, under innovation, you have innovation is propelled by research and development. Research and development is driven by education. Education is propelled by funding. You understand? Now, when you look at it, Africa and Nigeria, in fact, Nigeria invests the least in education as a percentage of GDP in the whole of Africa, if you know that. Now, so on the innovation side, we lost out. We really invest in research and development. Second, when you look at government policies, right, there are supposed to be policies in place that will help and grow industries. That we are not doing properly. And then third, availability of resource demand. Under availability of resource demand, you have financial resources, you have human capital resources, and then you have the raw materials or mineral resources, right? Now, under raw materials and mineral resources, Africa has abundance of that. But do we have enough financial resources, and do we have the capacity of human resources? Those are the questions we need to answer. And then industrial infrastructures. If you look at the industrial infrastructures across Africa, which are efficiency drivers, do we invest in those things? When you look at the most industrialized nations, you look at countries like Singapore, for instance, that is just 5.7 million people, exporting $645.6 billion worth of finished goods and services, not raw materials. Nigeria, of the $69.93 billion worth of goods and services exported in 2019, the mineral fuels, oil and distillation products accounted for over 90% of that. So we are just a non-productive nation. But we also need to go back into history to find out how we became a non-productive nation.
In other words, have we been previously productive?
Yes, at some point we were productive, right? But what nailed the coffin is part of what we're also going to look at. Okay. And to be able to understand that, we will go back to the history of the Industrial Revolution. Now, you see, the West are strategists. They know what they're doing. They know where they are going. In the next 100 or 200 years, the West already has a grand master plan on where they're going. But how that plan affects us is what we need to understand, and the strategies of the Western industrialization and how it came to bury the African economy.
What's the difference between Nigeria and other oil-producing countries who have larger exports than us?
Well, when you look at it, first of all, you look at countries like Dubai. When you go to most of the indexes, right? Now, one of the things I also need to explain to you, right, is when you look at all the indexes, right, you look at the Global Innovation Index. The first 30 countries are the most industrialized countries in the world. You go to Global Competitiveness Index, you find these same countries there. When you go to that's under innovation. When you go to research and development, these countries invest the highest as a percentage of GDP in research and development in the world. Then when you go to Human Capital Development Index, you find these same countries. It's not by coincidence. You go to government policies, you go to ease of doing business, go to the first 40 countries. We'll get to that chart. You find these same countries. You go to Global Infrastructure Index, you find these same countries, first 30 to first 40 countries. Why? See, you see all those things are all interlinked, right? Once one is missing, industrialization becomes impossible to achieve because innovation has to be there for you to be able to industrialize. And for you to innovate, you must invest in research. You must be carrying out a whole lot of research and development. For you to carry out a whole research and development, you must invest heavily in education, right? And then the ease of doing business must be there. Back to your question now. These countries, when they get money from oil, right, they invest in the 4 critical success factors of industrialization. And that's why, despite they have oil, right, they are also trying to industrialize. You look at countries like Dubai, right? You look at countries like Saudi Arabia, which is an oil-dependent economy. But go to Saudi Arabia and look at the infrastructures. And those are the things that the Western economies, right, will look at before coming into your economy. That, look, do they have these things in place? Because those things are efficiency drivers in the economy.
So what about Venezuela? Didn't they invest in some of those other indices, and where did they get it wrong?
Venezuela did not particularly invest in all those indices, right? If you look at innovation, what comes out of Venezuela? Only oil. Is there anything that you can lay hands to and say, this is produced in Venezuela? None. See, for you to be rich as a nation, you must learn to add value to something. If you cannot add value, either services or products, you must learn to add value. Tell me one thing that you can take from this country that you will find industries adding value to it, as in value chain, and then we put it in the market and say, this is made in Nigeria. You won't find any.
Why did you start from 1995?
No, because that's where I got the data from. Okay. 1995 for which of the...
Most of them were 1995.
Yes,
that's
where the data started from. But there's a reason for that, so that we will understand as we go on. It's just
because I'm just wondering, because before that time, we've always had challenges investing in education.
It started from 1981. We had our peak. We reached about 5% of GDP in education. By 1986, I said this some time ago, that the guy that came in 1986 was the one that turned education around and reduced education funding to less than 1%, I think 0.76%. By 1992, it was 0.76% of our total GDP, right? And for some reason, it has stayed like that ever since. It doesn't exist.
From your findings, if you found any reason for it, what was the reason for that?
I basically don't know. You have to ask the government why they decided to reduce education expenditure to less than 1% of your total GDP.
But as at the time we had the industries,
yes,
the 80s, maybe 1 or 2 years, early 90s, did we really invest that much in education, and do we export any of those things?
You find out. See, this thing is very technical, but you must learn how to piece the figures, events, and happenings together. You understand? And then when you lay them over history, if you're able to convert those figures to those those data to economic indices and look over history, what has been happening, then you'll be able to reach a logical conclusion on what is happening. But even our economy, right, despite the fact that we are now all dependent on oil, right, you will now come to understand the role of the Western world and how the Industrial Revolution buried Africa and particularly Nigeria. So let's go back. Let's go to the next slide, please.
That's what you're talking about, understanding the role.
Yes. So we need to understand the role of the Industrial Revolutions and the strategy of the developed economy. Now, if you understand basically the roles which your competitors play in business, or those who are ahead of you, right, you'll be able to understand or know what to do and policies to put in place to be able to reduce the risk and also maybe gain a larger chunk of the market. But right now, I'll tell you the truth, the Western world is about 200 or 300 years ahead. And we will not be able to catch up. But we can reduce the risk. Now, next slide, please. So we're going to go back to pre-industrial revolution so we can understand what is going on here. Now, before the first industrial revolution, it was the agrarian era, right? Where people mowed the fields with plow and mules, and then you had the cottage industry. Now, some guy came and designed the steam engine, and that was the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. So what did the steam engine do? It increased efficiency. That is mechanization, right? Now, machines started being able to produce things rather than using manual hands. Now, when that happened, let's go to the next slide, please.
That's it.
Okay. Now, when that happened, right, there were 4 critical success factors to the first industrial revolution. And they were innovation. These things are not listed anywhere. But when you study these revolutions and you look at the numbers, you find these 4 things that will completely and continuously repeat themselves. Innovation. What was the innovation of that period? It was the steam engine. Government policy. Now, the first industrial revolution happened in Britain. Now, immediately the steam engine came in, production increased, right? Efficiency, that means efficiency increased. One of the key words I want you to always look out for here is efficiency. Efficiency increased. And when efficiency increased, what happens is productivity increases, and then you cut down on wastage of time and resources and probably materials. And what that eventually leads you to is increase in profit. You understand? So when that happened, government jumped into action, brought out policies, and part of the policies they brought out was immigration policies. Because they needed more hands, they opened their borders to people, as in skilled labor, from outside Britain, majorly in Europe. And a lot of people came into Britain to work. Now, availability of resource demand, there had to be coal.
Just one moment.
Yeah.
You said government jumped in. Is that to say that the innovation was not government-led, was private sector-led?
It has always been a private sector-led. You understand? But you see, government in the Western world is not a businessman. They generate income from taxes. So when people come up with innovation, they know that if in economics they say innovation is what pushes every economy to a new potential. So when people come in with new innovation, the next thing government does, because they know that if this thing sells, it was going to push the economy to a new potential, right? And it's going to bring in revenue. The more revenue, the more taxes we generate. You understand? And we can meet our own obligation of being a government.
So what, they provide the enabling environment?
Yes, they provided the enabling environment, not just the enabling environment. They made sure that everything was in place for these innovations to succeed. Now, part of the government policies was immigration of skilled workers. Part of the government policies were also the availability of coal. They gave mining licenses to a lot of coal companies, to mine coal, because coal was the fuel of that period. And then government started building railway roads, because they know that because of the massive output, right, there has to be haulage of goods. And they built railway, they built roads, they dredged the canals so that the ship and boats can also move goods across England.
So there was a confluence of ideas between government and the private sector.
Exactly. That has always existed in the developed world. Now, so what that did was it boosted the economy, right? Now, that now led to the second industrial revolution. Let's go to the next slide, please. Next slide, please. Good. Now, the second industrial revolution, what happened? Somebody designed the combustion engine. Electricity came into place, and then mass production. Now, what I want you to also look at here is the critical success factors. Innovation of that period was electricity, combustion engine, and mass production, right? Now, electricity meant that companies could work 24/7. Excuse me. Companies could work 24/7, right? That means that output increased. There was communication. Somebody developed the telephone, right? Now, what now happened with combustion engine was that the combustion engine started phasing out coal. You understand? Combustion engine started phasing out coal. And then that was the birth of crude oil. Crude oil started being in high demand. Now, mass production was the major breakthrough for most companies. As mass production came in, I'll use Ford as an example, Ford Motors as an example.
Okay, pardon me. We need to go to break, but we'll come back and continue this in just a moment. Join us again. All right, welcome back. So you were going to use an example with Ford.
Yes. So now, we'll take mass production, for instance. And this, I said something, look out for efficiency. Now, there are three key strategies of the West: innovation, efficiency, and globalization. When you understand how these things interact, then you understand how our economy was buried. Now, in 1913, Ford rolled out the assembly plant, right? Now, before then, Ford was producing he assembled one car in 12 hours. But with the assembly plant, they were able to reduce that time to 1 hour, 33 minutes to assemble one car. So you can understand saving over 10 hours and what that is going to do to your profitability, right? Machines over time, right, were getting more efficient and getting smarter. And what they were doing was they're using machines to increase efficiency. Now, before that, in 1910, thereabout, a Ford Model T sold for over $800, right? But by 2017, by 1917, the Model T, the price had dropped to $360, about 63% of what the price was in 1910. So imagine saving 63%, right, in production cost. How much will you use as a bargaining power to put other people out of business? Do you understand it, right? So as the efficiency increases, right, there's a wider profit margin that can be used to bargain and reduce your, to reduce your cost, right, selling price, bargain and get a wider share of the market. So what now happened after that was the third industrial. Let's go to the next slide. You see what now happened?
I think Mark wants to come in and ask a question just before we move on to the next slide. Mark? Yeah. I'm sorry, we can't hear that right now. So
can you hear me?
Okay, we can hear you.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, some of the things that he's been saying now, some people say that it's not particularly new. I mean, before now, we have been talking about innovation. Nigeria beyond oil. We even saw some states, use that particular tag. We've been talking about diversification for a while. It's been a slang that's been in our policy lingo for a while now. My own inquiry will be into, and I really hate to interrupt your flow, Dr. Segali. However, I'm very curious as to why you think so far the policies that we have are not working or they're failing. And because you said that this is not a peculiarly Nigerian problem, it's an African problem. Some people have said, oh, it's a deliberate policy by former colonial masters to ensure that you do not get out of where it is that you are. I do not know if you've seen any of these linkages as to where Nigeria currently is. We do know that some countries are struggling to get out of that. For instance, Ghana, which is now saying that no cocoa will leave its shores without value being added to it. So what do you think is causing the failures that we're currently experiencing with our diversification policies?
Okay, now, I'll take Ghana, for instance, right? Let me quickly answer that question. Now, you're saying you will not sell cocoa to me because you want me to bring my manufacturing plants to your country. Now, there are four, I said earlier, there are four critical success factors to industrialization. And the Western world had always invested in those things. Those things are efficiency drivers. Now, you do not invest in innovation. Your government policies are not top-notch. You do not invest in industrial infrastructures. Those things reduce cost of production. So if I am producing in Switzerland and I have those things, all those factors available, do you understand? They may reduce my cost of production to maybe $1 or $2 per bar of chocolate. And I can sell at $5 to $6 or $7, right? But you're trying to force me to come into a market where those things do not exist. And then I now have to start making provisions for those things. What eventually happens is it will increase my cost, maybe to $4 to $5, right, per bar of chocolate. How do I get competitive? This is what needs to be done. See, all this going around and inviting people to come and invest, don't invite anybody. China, what they did, they put all their industrial infrastructures in place, and then they cleaned up their house. The people came. The same thing in Dubai. When the Sheikh was building Dubai, he was building all the infrastructures and putting things in place. And people were questioning him. Who are the people that are going to use this thing? He said one keyword. He said, they will come. Once you put the efficiency drivers in place, the Western world will come. They will come. Look at Twitter, for instance. Twitter went to Ghana, and people were arguing. And I laughed, and I said, they don't understand what is behind it. In 2017, the World Bank conducted a survey and said, okay, what do multinational CEOs look at before going into emerging economies? And what did they come up with? The first on the list was political stability and security, right? The second on the list that they voted for most was political stability and security. Second was law and regulatory environment. And then third was size of market, right? Now, when you now look at the four critical success factors to industrialization, go look at all the indexes. When you look at Global Innovation Index, Ghana is ahead of us. You look at percentage of research and development, funds for research and development as a percentage of GDP, Ghana invests more than us. When you look at the Global Human Capital Development Index, Ghana is ahead of us. You look at the ease of doing business, Ghana is ahead of us. You look at the index on global infrastructure, Ghana is ahead of us. Multinational CEOs are not stupid. When it comes to the part where they have to put down money, they look at all those indexes. When you clean up your house, you don't have to invite the visitors. They will come because the efficiency drivers are already there. So back to your question, Maokwe, when you look at over time, the policies might be there, but when you look at the critical success factors to industrialization, we do not invest in them. And that is what the Western world looks at. If we need to diversify, we need to start investing in the four critical success factors that drive industrialization. So I want to quickly run through this.
Personally, you know, you've talked about how Singapore is about the size of Lekki Peninsula, and how, you know, they're very productive per capita, so to speak. We have had innovations whereby, or ideas whereby we have set up hubs where we think that, you know, if we set up a hub, industrialization hubs or export hubs, that, you know, we could attract that sort of investment, or we could focus on creating the sort of infrastructure that investors would be looking for. And then when you also go down to a micro level, you've seen that some states are more active than others. Do you think that this, when we look at the general average for the country, because I imagine that at the end of the day, when we're talking about ease of doing business, we're talking about a number of other factors when it comes to infrastructure and, you know, GDP and what have you. We're looking at it as a country, I mean, as a whole. And oftentimes, if all the parts are not doing as well as, you know, some other parts are doing, then it will drag the national average down. But do you think that we could focus on certain areas where we think that we're doing well, especially certain parts in the country that we have been able to make this investment? Is it possible to highlight those figures and wonder whether or not we could actually attract investors to those areas?
I would answer your question, but I need to run to the next phase of the analysis. That will help you understand the question you are asking. And it's very critical because of time, right? Now, when you look at the third industrial revolution, right, it was about computer IT automation. The 4 critical success factors were also present: innovation, government policies, availability of resource demand, and industrial infrastructure. Now, this is where the West got very smart, and they knocked us off the table. Next slide. Innovation, efficiency, and globalization. Good. Now, this is what I want you to look at. The third industrial revolution brought about, the first phase of the third industrial revolution was the mainframe computer. In 1960, just 10 years after the third industrial revolution started, the combined global world economy was 1.369 trillion. By 1990, it had increased to 22.627 trillion, right? Now, this was the BAT where they were using the mainframe computer. So companies interacted with one another. But the interesting thing is this. By the first 30 years, the world economy increased by about 20.6 trillion. The next 29 years to 2019, GDP increased to 87.7 trillion. Why? This is what people do not understand. See, the next phase of the third industrial revolution was the use of personal computers and IT. So what that did was that every company, the birth of www.com. So every company became an international company. Remember, they already innovated. The machines had now driven efficiency, right? And with the increase in efficiency came the lowering of what? Production cost. Do you understand? Now, the next 30 years, from 1990 to 2019, right, global economy increased by 65 trillion. 65 trillion. Now, but who were the major beneficiaries of it? It was the countries that invested in those industrial, critical success factors to industrialization. Now, only 10 countries, these countries listed below, account for 65%. That is 57 trillion of that 87 trillion.
Forgive me for supporting it.
Yes.
All of these figures, ultimately it's about human beings. You've talked about companies, you've talked about countries,
yes.
The nations playing their roles. You've talked about the companies playing, critical roles. But you haven't quite, talked about the another critical factor, if I can use that term, which is the people, the manpower that are that are used, by the countries and the companies to champion.
Yeah, that comes under availability of resource demand, what I talked about earlier. Now, if you look at the second industrial revolution, right, immediately there was mass production. The US passed a law. They allowed, I think, over 11 years, if I'm right, about 25 million immigrants came into the country because there was so much to produce. They started expanding the roads, they were building railways, right? But back to the slide. Now, this is where they buried the economy. Now, between 1990 and 2019 is 29 years, right? When did all our industries die? They started dying from 1998, right? Now, from that 1990, what you would see is that you and I could now sit down, surf the internet, buy our goods from anywhere in the world, and ship them in. So the next phase of what they did was globalization, right? Now, we have the efficiency, we have the innovation. They cannot compete with our prices anymore. So, and then they launched the internet for you and I and gave us personal computers, right? So you could source for their goods. Amazon came up, Alibaba, and every other companies. So you could now buy. Now, go to the next slide. 10 countries. But when you now use the EU as an economy, right? And then you add Singapore, you add Hong Kong, and then Taiwan. Those countries account for 71% of the total GDP of the world. Why? Now, you see the biggest gainers. This is from 1990 to 2019. You see, the blue is where their export was in 1990, while the red is where their export is in 2019. Now, between that same 1990 and 2019 was when all our companies started dying off because we couldn't compete anymore. And it brings me back to the second industrial revolution. What did the government do? Immediately the West started industrializing. They made sure, as somebody in the book, The Bad Samaritan, he said the West was built on three things: protectionism, tariffs, and subsidies. The US passed a law then to make sure that foreign goods were not going to be able to compete with the locally made goods. You understand? To be able to build up their industries. The critical thing...
That was a law.
Yeah, that was a law.
Not a policy.
It was. I think it was a law or policy. I can't remember, but it was something that was put down under the policy, right? To make sure that foreign goods don't come in and destroy the potentials of locally made goods. And this is what I want to say. Without industrialization, we're not going anywhere. That's the truth. These are three key questions I ask people. Is there any developed country that is not industrialized? You will not find any. Is there any industrialized country that does not have a military might? You will not find any. Sorry, okay. Please. And then, if you now come to the undeveloped countries or developing countries, will you find any one of them that is industrialized? None. Will you find any one of them that has military might? None. So industrialization is the key factor to getting us out of where we are. Now,
okay, let's finish the slide so we can put in those questions. No.
Okay.
Just wanted to finish the slide.
So you see the trend, right? The biggest gainers are those that have invested in the 4 critical success factors. The truth is this: we cannot compete anymore. That's the truth. The fourth industrial revolution is going to take efficiency to an unprecedented level. If Ford could reduce the cost of a Model T from mass production from over $800 to $360, right, in 7 years. Now, just imagine what the fourth industrial revolution is going to do when machines start to do things. The cost of production is going to fall drastically. There's something I want us to see before your question. Next slide, please. Now, this is our currency depreciation. Now, see what happened between 1990 and 2020. So,
just a moment. What informed the stability between 1985 and 1995?
Honestly, I don't know. We need to go into those policies, right? To be very honest with you. But you see, one of the things I also noticed, I got a personal computer for the first time, I think year 2000, that I bought my laptop. You understand? That I bought a laptop for myself for the first time. But if you look at the 90s, not many people had personal computers. Not many people had email addresses. Not many people could surf the net. We all started surfing the net, creating email addresses, a lot of people from year 2000. And then we started buying things from abroad and shipping them in. And with the imports increasing, right, our currency started depreciating. Your currency is the strength of productivity. Sorry, the strength of your currency is from productivity. If you're not productive, and one of the things I also want you to see here, see, in 1999, right, the Nigerian naira officially sold for 21 naira, the dollar sold for 21 naira 89 kobo officially. By 2010, it was selling at about 150 naira. But guess what? Between 1999 and 2010, we had an average growth in the economy of 7.11%. The economy was growing, but yet the currency was depreciating. Why? Because we were not producing anything.
So why then is Africa blaming the West? Because they innovated.
I used to, yeah, exactly. I used to have that. Good question. I used to have that notion too. I used to think that way. But these people have been investing in the four critical success factors of industrialization. You benefit from what you invest in. We have not been investing in those things. So it is coming back to haunt us. But the thing is this, we need to understand how things work. Once you're able to understand how things work, then you are able to mitigate or reduce the risk around it. If we do not industrialize, we cannot even catch up with innovation. I'll show you something. Say, this is a Samsung. This is Apple, right? These guys are ever innovating. They are ever innovating. So when you go to the Global Competitiveness Index, you will find them. Because the more you innovate, the more you become competitive.
Just as you said earlier, these things are private sector led.
Yes.
And government supports. And the reason I asked the question about, that stability is that between 1983 and 1999, we had a military rule.
Yes.
Look at what happened to us in the Fourth Republic alone. Look at the quantum of depreciation of the naira within this Fourth Republic.
Yes.
Now, what that is, the question that is leading to for me is all across Africa, just as you have said, it's as if every country that had a military rule and then got into, a civilian rule, we seem to be having challenges because most of these countries that you've talked about that are revolutionized and all, they've had democracy consistent for a very, 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 very long time.
Yes.
How do we get there?
But you see, the thing is this: you cannot benefit from what you did not invest in. That is the truth. You cannot benefit from what you did. We did not invest in all these things. And the critical thing is this: we need to industrialize. If we industrialize, we are able, even if we cannot meet up with the innovation of the West, right?
We can leapfrog certain things.
Yes, we can leapfrog certain things. Look, cocoa and chocolate is a $136 billion industry. Africa exports 75% of all cocoa seeds worldwide. Netherlands, that does not grow cocoa. Cocoa is a tropical plant. It's not a temperate plant. Processes 13% of all cocoa seeds worldwide into chocolate. So of that 136 billion, Africa's share is about 5 billion or even less. Now, you sell something for 5 billion. By the time the West adds value to it, they bring it back. Maybe about 10 to $12 billion worth of chocolate ends up back in Africa. So what you sold for 5 billion, you're having to buy back for 10 to 12 billion. Okay, you see the deficits that are being created. And that's how it is being created across every product. Gold, diamond, you name it.
Okay, as we wind down now, two things. If we solve our electricity challenge, and then after is in place, how can those two things help?
There's something I want to say, right? if you solve your electricity problem, efficiency increases. And then the next thing is what?
After.
Sorry?
Africa
Okay,
after,
free trade. Yes. Well, it might help, but the thing is this. My opinion about the free trade zone is it might be more harmful to us when you don't have a product that you sell. You understand? Before you open your economies up, and the West protected their economies for a long time. They got it right before they opened it up. The same model China used, right? But this is what I want to say. You see, skilled immigration did not start today. It started way back in the first industrial revolution. Now, what stops us from poaching white people too? Now, see, in 2012, when the World Bank carried out a study on the wealth of nations, they found out that the greatest of wealth were the human capital, right? Now, in the OECD countries, 75% on average is human, their total wealth, 75% on average is human capital. Britain had 89% when they broke it down of their total wealth as human capital. US, 75%. Japan had over 90%, right? That means that when they are taking you and I, they are stealing the greater of our wealth, right? But this is the thing. Why can't we open our borders to foreigners too? Tell them, give them citizenship. The West knows that they cannot do it alone, even with all their technology. Do you understand? Why can't we follow the same model? Availability of resource demand, that's the human capital asset. You understand? Canada will advertise every year that they need X amount of people. They know the industries that are lacking. If we want to industrialize, and which we have to, other than that, we are going down. We need to open our borders to immigration. Let us advertise it, bring in these people, and then give them the citizenship too, so that they can be part of us.
All the more reason why we need to get that big leadership recruitment process right, because it feeds into other things, getting the right policies and ensuring that right things are done. But thank you very much indeed for coming on. Roman Osala is a business survey analyst. We will be back in a moment. Don't go away.